WDON is proud to present our latest podcast, The Colors of Sound. Our mission is to create a safe space for community members from around the world to share their personal stories. Listen on all streaming platforms or on our podcast station, WDON1204.com. The Colors of Sound podcast. Discover how much we have in common. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Colors of Sound podcast. I am so excited to have my guest on today. I cannot believe we got her to agree to do it. I would like to introduce everyone to my mom, Reverend Ann L Coleman of Lincoln, Nebraska. Mom, thanks so much for being with me on the show today.
Okay, I didn't exactly agree. I was forced into it.
I think we're still short of it being elder abuse, but we're glad to have you here either way.
It's a blessing to be here, son.
Where were you born?
I was born in Portsmouth, Ohio, and the strongest influence, aside from my mom, was our church. It just was right in our community, and all of us, cousins, friends, whatever, went to that church, and so that was the strongest influence. And I used to tell people with my mom, you're going to be in church unless you're in the hospital. Even when you die, they wheel you up front. So you're going to be in church always. And I'm thankful for that. So that kind of is what influenced my life. I absolutely loved all of my grand aunts and uncles, all of my grand sisters and brothers. And we were blessed to have all of them around us, close enough. Some of them lived in the home that my great grandparents had raised their kids in. Some of them still lived in that home. And when mom would tell us we could go, outside, I would run to my instead of just going out and whatever, I would run to all of my different aunts and uncles' houses. I loved listening to them and I loved being around them. And of course, all of them cooked like no other. And there were always triple layer cakes, and there were always green beans and mac and cheese. And whatever house you went to, there was something, apple pies, you name it. But that wasn't what drew me. What drew me was just being with them. I used to just love to sit on the porch with my aunts and just listen to them talk, and that kind of thing. And so I had this aunt. She was my maternal grandmother's oldest sister.
Okay.
And we called her Aunt Matt. And that was the neatest lady. She was tiny like my other grandmother. She was a little bitty thing. I bet Aunt Matt never weighed 100 pounds in her life. Yeah. Just a little thing. But I had these uncles that were, 5'11", 6 feet, whatever, 250, the big old uncles, my mother's brothers. When Aunt Matt spoke, she never raised her voice, never said a bad word. Just when she spoke, those uncles did what she said. I mean, she was the matriarch of the family, and she had the respect of the family. And when my mom, when she had me, she developed tuberculosis. And back in the day, that was different than it is today. It was the same disease as today, but it was treated differently. And so I was 5 months old, and they put my mom in a sanitarium where she was in there for 2 or 3 years. And
Wow.
And Aunt Matt kept me. And my other grandmother in Greenfield kept my brother. And I was with Aunt Matt like as a little toddler. I can still see her. I can still see the house. By her door, she had a candy dish with those great big peppermint balls in them, but they were the soft ones,
Yummy.
And I mean, they were yummy. And then in her kitchen, she would be rolling out the dough, making pie or mixing up the cornbread or whatever, And I was always on my knees on a chair watching her and getting a taste of this and a taste of that. And of course, when she got the cake out of the bowl, I got the bowl. When she got the icing out, I got the bowl, and that kind of thing. And she told me, now you don't want to do this with cornbread. Of course, I stuck my finger in to see. He was right. But Aunt Matt kept me um, through my toddler years. And I don't remember, I think it's a repressed memory. I don't
Hmm.
remember when the handoff was, like when my mom got well and got my brother and I. I never did ask him if he remembered, but I don't remember being given back to my mom from Aunt Matt. And
Mm.
my first memory, my very absolute first memory of my mother was the day she came home from the hospital with my sister. I have no memory. I don't even remember her pregnant. I have no memory of my mom before the day she came home from the hospital with my little sister.
Wow.
Prior to that, I have no memory. And I think it's because I was so attached to Aunt Matt, and I guess I just didn't want to be away from her. And
Yeah.
and then all the rest of my time in Portsmouth, I was always trying to break away and get over to Aunt Matt's house. Always. And I would go, and she had taken my cousin, her brother, Uncle Will's son. She had taken him when he was like maybe 8 or 9. Richard was young. Uncle Will's wife, Richard's mom, had passed, and Uncle Will had remarried. And Aunt Jean was a little different. And so
Definitely.
Aunt Matt wasn't happy. So she went over to her brother's house, took his son, took him to her house, and finished raising him.
Wow.
And when I came along, he just called me his little sister, even though we were cousins, you know. But he always called me his little sister. And Aunt Matt, she would take the uncles in if one of them got sick. She nursed them back to health. She was that person. And that was my joy. Being around my Aunt Matt was my absolute joy. And of all the people God placed on this earth, as far as those that took care of me, Aunt Matt was my favorite. And she sat on the second bench in church from the front. She sat straight up. Her back never slumped, ever. She sat straight up. She paid full attention, and I would be sitting so close, it was like I was trying to get in her skin. I would be snuggled up under her, and my mom would be in the choir. When I got big enough to be able to be in the youth choir, then I joined the youth choir. But anything I could do to be around Aunt Matt, I did. She was a no nonsense person, but she wasn't a mean person. She was soft spoken. She meant what she said when she said it.
That's right.
And she would take me on Sunday afternoons after church. There was an ice cream parlor next door to where my grandmother ended up living. And so Aunt Matt would take me over to their house. And Uncle Frank was in a wheelchair, and he had one of those, they call them spittoons, the big thing they,
Oh my God, that's so
that
gross.
nasty tobacco in.
Yeah.
He would motion me over, and Aunt Matt made everything I wore. Everything. She was a seamstress. My bonnets, my coats, everything. I had velvet coats and bonnets. I had fur trimmed. I had every kind of dress and slip and whatever imaginable. Everything I wore, Aunt Matt made. And so she would take me on Sunday afternoon in my little white dress she had made. And Uncle Frank would motion me to come to him, and he would have me look under the scarf on the table, because
Uh-huh.
he always had money for me under there. And I would go over and I would get my money out from under. And next door was the ice cream parlor. And while Aunt Matt and her sister were talking, Uncle Frank would send me over there. And I would go, and Miss Clark, the lady that ran the parlor, would sit me, she or her husband would sit me up on a stool. I couldn't even climb up there. They would sit me on a stool because they had the ice cream parlor was different. It wasn't like you could just go in and pull up at a table. It was like a bar, and so they'd sit me up, and I would always get chocolate ice cream. And then they'd send me next door to back to Aunt Matt. And
Hmm.
when I get there, she would have a couch. You would see all this chocolate all over me and all over my white dress. And she wouldn't fuss at me. She'd start in on Uncle Frank. And she would, if this was a Sunday in and Sunday out event, she already knew what he was going to do. He knew what he was going to do, and I certainly knew. And he would always motion me over. He'd have the money laying under the scarf on the table over there buying. I'd reach under there, get the money, go next door, get full of chocolate, come back. It was the routine, and Aunt Matt would fuss at Uncle Frank every time, and it did not matter. It didn't matter. But yeah, I had great, great times with her. And I remember asking her as I began to grow up, I hit maybe 11 or 12. And I asked her, Aunt Matt, did you have any kids? And she said, yeah, I had 4 sons. All of her children and her husband had cats.
Wow.
And there was not anything about her that was morose or sad. She just loved all of us, and we became her kids.
Wow.
And she just was that way. But that was my favorite person. But I would go to all of my uncles and aunts' houses, and they made all of us kids welcome. But I liked being around them.
Right.
Just a joy, just an absolute joy. And they poured into us. They just poured into us. They expected so much from us. All of us cousins. They just poured into us, and they loved to see us coming. And if they didn't, we didn't know it. And ours wasn't a family of huggers and kissers and saying I love you. You didn't. None of that happened. None of it. But we knew we were loved.
Right. In so many other ways.
I don't
Through so
remember.
many other ways you saw. Yeah.
I don't remember, them hugging us and pulling us up on their lap and saying I love you. None of that. I just tried to make sure I did that with mine, because sometimes you need to hear that. But I don't remember hearing them say that. I just knew it.
Share your story on the Colors of Sound podcast. Our mission is to create a safe space for community members from around the world to share their unique stories. Do you have an interesting story to share? Or perhaps a journey of triumph from a challenge that you faced? Do you want the world to know about your talent? Visit our website and complete our guest intake form at WDON1204.com. The Colors of Sound podcast. Discover how much we have in common.
I don't know how Portsmouth is today, but it was a wonderful, wonderful place to be. And we were protected. So all of the things that back in the 50s that Black people couldn't do, all of us kids weren't affected by it, because we were in our community. We had our parents, we had uncles and aunts, we had great uncles and aunts, we had neighbors, and everybody watched the kids. And so we were just protected, well taken care of and protected.
We don't have a lot of that village mentality anymore.
Yeah, I know. We really did have the whole village. We were so protected. And we didn't know as children about the need, about not having this or not having that. We just felt like we had everything. And then my dad's mom lived in Greenfield, which is another southern Ohio city, but it's a little more north than where I was born. And my dad's family lived there. And my grandmother contributed immensely to our growth. We were with her in the summer and with my mom in the winter. And so grandmother really helped my mom with us. And my dad, when we saw my dad, he was a soft-spoken guy. He wasn't much on spanking or any of that. He would just talk to you. And, and he could talk to you and bring you to tears.
You were 15 when you moved to Indiana?
2 months before my 15th birthday in February.
And how long? Okay.
Were we in Indiana?
Yeah.
Mother was there for years. She and Frank lived there for years, but he was a brick mason. And so the work was seasonal. And so they would go to Alabama, where he was from, when the weather would be bad in Gary. And so I had done my junior year of high school, and heading for my senior year, my mom said, we're going to Alabama. And
Hmm.
never ever did we say, we're not going to do what she said or anything like that. Back in the day, parents didn't play. But I said to mom, I'm not going to Alabama. And she says, well, where do you want to go? I said, I'll go stay with daddy and grandmother. And I said, and my sister's going with me. So mother said, okay. And so my senior year of high school, I was in Greenfield, Ohio. And
Hmm.
and I've always been protective of my sister. So I had, she was there in junior high. And that's where I met Don Coleman when he was getting out of the army. He had done 3 years and had gone in the reserves, and coming back to Greenfield in his uniform, thinking he's cute. And and there, so then I was like 17. And from that age till 77, I was with him.
Wow.
I dated him a year, and then we married. And so I had 60 years with your dad.
WDON1204.com presents our new book, The Colors of Sound Podcast Planner and Journal. In order for a podcast to bring about transformational change, the content must be engaging, memorable, and have a level of quality that sets it apart from the crowd. We focus on the art of storytelling and the development of your point of view as a host. The Colors of Sound Podcast Planner and Journal. Visit Amazon.com and get your copy today.
Welcome back to the Colors of Sound podcast on WDON1204.com. I'm here with my mom, Reverend Ann L Coleman, known to me just by mom, but she's also grandma, she's also great-grandma, she's also sister, pastor, reverend. So mom, let's jump into the conversation of, so you and dad got married and you were 18, and so then what happened after that? You guys were still in Greenfield for a while, or?
We we were there for a short time. Um, your dad was still in the reserves at that time. And then President Kennedy called uh, the reserves back, called the guys back in 1962 because of Cuban crisis, I believe. And so
Yeah.
your dad re-entered the army, and we went to Germany. And so we were there for, I think, 5 years or close to it. And went over there with two babies, brought four babies home. And and so we went to Virginia for a bit, and then we went back to Ohio. When we went back to Ohio, your dad went to Vietnam.
Hmm.
Uh, so we had to hastily buy a house. It wasn't like we could just go look everywhere. We got a house. He called his brother, said, find us a house in Dayton, and he did, and we moved to Dayton. And that's where where we started raising you kids. And because even you started in Dayton, you were going in fourth grade when we moved to Iowa, and
Right.
in sixth grade when we came to uh, Lincoln.
Nebraska. Yeah.
So you started in Ohio, but all the others kind of grew up there. I met my friend through your dad. He and another guy, they were repossessing cars. I don't know how
Uh-huh.
to manage that, but it was kind of a nighttime thing. And they got a kick out of going and repossessing cars and having people yelling, screaming, and shooting at them.
Oh my goodness.
It was really crazy. Well, his wife and I, Shirley Robinson, we became best friends immediately. I mean, we just immediately became very good friends. Shirley was a Christian, and she led me to the Lord. Now, I grew up in church, and I grew up
Hmm.
loving the Lord and hearing about the Lord and anything to do with the Lord. But I didn't understand giving my heart to the Lord. And so Shirley led me, that way. And so we went to church together. And then um, another lady led another friend of mine, and I to United Christian Center. And that's kind of where my growth in the Lord started. Um,
Okay.
we were under Pastor Doris Swartz, and that's where everything started to come together. And so my girlfriend Betty and I, we would load up the station wagon with pack the kids in like sardines, her kids, my kids, the neighbor kids, and anybody else's kids that want to go, and we'd take them all and go to church. Having all of you babies around me was fun. I love being a mom, and I love being a grandmom. And I have many nieces and nephews that call and check in on me and love on me and that kind of thing. So I've had a good life. I really have. And when I was ordained, um, our church would have interdenominational conferences. And at that time, back in the day, it was like every 3 or 4 months, there would be a
Okay.
different church. And Pastor Doris she was at that time, the assistant to the president of that organization. And she eventually became the president of the organization. And people would come from New York, from Africa, from wherever to our church for this event. And what would happen is after the event, which would last 3 or 4 days, they would have a prayer over those that want to be ordained. And I don't remember how long I was under Pastor Doris at that time, but I went to her and I asked her, could I be ordained? And her answer was, I wondered how long it would take you.
Yeah.
And so that was in February of 1977. I was ordained into ministry, and that's where another change in my life took place. It was really really fun. Uh, my friend and I would go out. We always worked with kids. We always worked with young people, and we would go into places that probably we shouldn't have gone in, but we didn't know it. We didn't know we were supposed to be afraid. And we would go, and parents would say, so and so's here or so and so's there, and we need to get her out. We'd go get her. You'd walk up in there and get her. And
Hmm.
many kids were drawn to the Lord, made God their choice through that ministry. And we had so much fun, and we didn't know we were supposed to be afraid. You know,
I remember that church as a kid. It was just like lots of love. I mean, like
yeah.
the energy of it, you remember it as a child. The energy of it was so loving.
All of the things that happened in between have been great. There have been some hard times. There have been
Yeah.
some, everything wasn't smooth sailing. There have been times when we kind of wondered which way to go or how we were going to make it. But God never fails, ever. And if you give him a chance, he'll help you work it out. He doesn't take you over it or around it. He takes you through it. And,
That's right.
so I always say, if you praise him in it, he'll take you through it. And so whatever came up, he was always faithful. He always brought us through. And there were times that were pretty rough, you know. But for the most part, I look back, that song somebody wrote, I won't complain. I've
Hmm.
had some good times and I've had some hard times, but the good times outweigh the hard times. So I'm not going to complain.
When you were ordained into ministry, that was a time period when, and I think maybe even still now, but that was definitely a time period when women weren't really accepted as equals in the pulpit, right?
True. That's true. And there again, I was protected. Um, because when I was ordained, first off, the church I was in, United Christian Center, uh, Pastor Doris wasn't pastor. And she was
Right.
bold and she wasn't afraid. So I kind of got that mantle of hers. And when we began to move, like your dad with the military, we moved to Iowa, and then we moved here, and we've been here a number of years. And I have run into pastors that don't believe in women ministries, but I haven't run into pastors that scare me out of the ministry, because
Right.
pastors didn't call me to ministry. My pastor, when she said, I wondered how long it would take you, she never said to me, "You're going to be a preacher." I didn't even know, but I heard the Lord in my inner ear say, I want you to preach for me. And I remember thinking, me? I was very shy. Um, I just didn't like being in front of people. It just petrified me. And when the Lord spoke to me that he wanted me to speak, it was the Lord talking to me. I knew his voice. The Bible says, "My sheep know my voice, and another they won't follow." So I knew his voice. I didn't tell anybody that he had spoken to me. I didn't
Mm.
go and say to anybody that I heard that message. So 6 years later, when I went to Sister Doris and told her I wanted to be ordained, she said, "I wonder how long it would take you." Now, so she must have known when I knew. But
Hmm.
but that has never affected me. I've had ministers have me preach and they have me stand on the floor. I couldn't go in the pulpit. I'm the same person on the floor I am in the pulpit. It doesn't change who I am. And
That's right.
so I never feared people. I didn't know, like I said, I didn't know I was supposed to be scared of them. So I wasn't.
Right.
And the only thing I would ever say is God called me. I know it. No one else told me that until after it was confirmation after, you know, I had people say things after. But I wasn't afraid of people or men. It didn't matter. And your dad was the kind of man, he never lorded over us that he was the head of the family. He might tease us and say something like
Right.
that, but he never
Right.
did that. He never made me feel like I wasn't good enough or I wasn't part of what was going on or whatever. I never had to feel less than in my home.
Right.
And I never felt less than in my church. So the community, I didn't care who liked it or who didn't.
Well, and I laugh at the joke that you and Dad had going on because the two of you were like improv, comedy
Mhm.
king and queen. And he one day says, "Well, I'm the head of this family,"
Yeah.
and you lean right over in no time flat, and you say, "Well, I'm the neck that turns the head."
In fact, people would say, um, "How long have you been married?" or "How did you meet?" or whatever. And I would always tell him, "You give your version and I'll tell him the truth." And so your dad would say, "I told her when we were married that I am the head of this family." He said, and then she said, "And I'm the neck that turns the head." And so that's kind of how we've been, how we were.
Welcome to The Gladly, a contemporary neighborhood eatery nestled in the heart of Central Phoenix. Here, local chef Bernie Cantat crafts flavorful new American cuisine blended with innovation and tradition. At The Gladly, every dish is a celebration of taste, paired with the extensive beverage program boasting over 350 whiskeys. Join us and savor the magic of The Gladly, where every meal is an experience and every visit a memory.
Before your dad got sick, we were associate pastors at a church here in Lincoln, and the pastor retired in December of 2016. And so by then, your dad was sick, and I was taking care of him. And so I didn't take over the church. I preferred to be able to boss your dad around, and
Mhm.
and that's pretty much what I did. I took care of him, and so from 2015 till 2018, I was the caretaker. And I was telling a friend today, back then, your dad probably, I may not be right, probably took maybe 20 pills a day or 22 or something a day.
Wow.
Um, and I knew every pill. I knew
Yeah.
I knew the dosage. I knew when he should take them, the whole 9 yards.
Right.
So it was hard to separate my life from him.
Right.
Everything we said, it was we, us, and what have you. I never said I or my. It was always ours. Unless you kids were acting up, then you were his. But that pretty much was it. So I had to get used to, and it was very uncomfortable to say my house or my car or my anything because it was ours.
Right.
You know,
Right.
it's just been different. I'm not depressed or lonely or any of that. I'm fine. But it just took a while. And I tell people, if you can get past all of the first, you'll be okay. The first,
Right.
the first birthday, the first Valentine's Day, the first anything, then you will be able to breathe if you can just get past the first. You all and the grandkids were always calling to make sure I got through those days. So I did just fine.
Well, I think we tease in the family that you earned your nursing degree,
Yeah.
you know, the hard way. I mean, obviously, I don't want to confuse anybody. You don't have an official nursing degree, but the
Right.
way you took care of dad, the way you were always by his side, I remember being there at a couple of different points, and, you had booklets with notes in it where you kept track of everything, his blood pressure, his glucose, the time that he took the pills, which ones. I mean, like, everything was very meticulous, the way you took care of it and the way you saw after him. And I mean, it did any marriage proud. You stayed with him through all of it, thick and thin, and really were the most perfect gatekeeper as new doctors or second opinions or new physicians or somebody came in the room saying, "Oh, well, it should be this or it looks like that." You were very, you were right there, like, "Well, now wait a minute, hold on a second. What are you basing that on? This is the trajectory." You were able to really like keep everything under control, which was a lot of pressure in and of itself, outside of that long of a marriage and raising kids and having grandkids, all those things. But this was a new type of stress and pressure. And so you got a little sick after he passed away, but I think it was
Exhausted.
now you didn't have all of, yeah, you were just so exhausted from those years of like 24/7
Right.
joyously doing it, loving him and the whole thing, but still that toll that it took on your body. um you actually had time to fully experience it.
First, I sat on the couch. I didn't know who I was or who I should be, because my whole life revolved around your father. And so I was kind of lost. The scripture came to me. I've set before you life and death. And the end of that scripture is therefore choose life. But I didn't hear that part. I just heard I set before you life and death. And I knew what God was doing was giving me a choice. And so I chose life. And from that point forward, the heaviness lifted. Um, I could see the light.
Share your story on the Colors of Sound podcast. Our mission is to create a safe space for community members from around the world to share their unique stories. Do you have an interesting story to share? Or perhaps a journey of triumph from a challenge that you faced? Do you want the world to know about your talent? Visit our website and complete our guest intake form at WDON1204.com. The Colors of Sound podcast. Discover how much we have in common.
If everything's absolutely perfect, I've never seen anybody like that. I've seen people pretend, but I've never seen anybody where everything's absolutely perfect. If you
Right.
make a mistake, you you correct your mistake and you go from there. It's not the end of the world because you made a mistake.
That's right.
It's not the end of the world because you dropped the ball. Pick it up and keep running.
One of the things that I appreciate the most, and even in the work that I do in the community, that really came from you and dad. That the ability to listen to the heart, and listen and really hear. Because some people, like you and I spoke so much, like when I was working at the Department of Education and stationed in the South Bronx, and how they would all come to the superintendent's office all huff and gruff and ready to, like, blow the house down. And next thing you know, they're teaching workshops for other parents, and now they're small business owners and whatever. A lot of all of that was growing up, and I say this to people all the time. It was like I was growing up in a master class of service. And it's like, as a teenager, you don't have those words to define it that way, and you don't know that necessarily is what it is so explicitly. But, like, as I look back, and I think, your service was even more than the church, but even just being available for prayer, being available to go and meet people at the hospital, being in the pulpit, bringing the messages, etc., and mix that with Dad's street ministry. I mean, there was so much to learn mentally, physically, spiritually throughout all of that.
One of the main things to learn in talking to people is not to just hear their words, but to hear their heart.
Yes.
Sometime when people come in and they're woofing and they're bad and they're mad and they're upset and they just want to beat everybody up, they need someone to hear their heart, because in their heart they're screaming, "Help me! I need help." And they're not really always as mean as they seem. There are some that are mean, but for the most part, when they're really having a hard day and they're taking it out on everybody, they need you to hear their heart. Stop listening to just the words and hear what's really being said. And when you do that, you can be a blessing, no matter who the person is. You can just bless them, and everyone going to receive the positive things you put before them. The Bible says, one waters, one plants, one waters, and God gives the increase. You don't know if you're the planter or the waterer when you're listening to them. You know if you're planting the seed or if you're watering the seed that was planted. But
Mm.
but the point is, God causes the seed to grow. And so and all healing starts inside. It starts inside. Before it's manifested on the outside, something's been going on the inside. When you put a seed in the ground, all the other stuff is going on in the ground, and then the seed pops up. The plant pops up. You don't put a seed in the ground and go out the next day and have a beautiful plant. It takes a minute. It
Right.
takes some sun and some water and all the other things that go on, for this seed to grow. And so it's the same thing
Right.
when a seed is planted in someone's heart. You don't know if you planted the seed or if you're watering the seed somebody planted. It doesn't matter. The point is, after a while, even though as you look at that person, you think, "Oh my Lord, when?" God is doing it. And
Right.
he will manifest that, and you'll be able to see that he was working on that person all along. you know Even though some days it doesn't look like God and that person are in the same world. But if you just be patient, and God will do what he has to do. And that's the thing I've enjoyed about ministry, is the encouragement. I love to encourage people.
Hmm.
There are
Hmm.
enough people tearing people down. If you're a person that just does what you please and you don't care what anybody thinks, you already know that's not right. If you're an addict, you already know you're an addict. If you're any of the negatives, you already know what's wrong with you. Um, but when someone comes along and points out something in you that is worth saving, that's what gets your attention. We don't need
Hmm.
anybody beating us up. We just need somebody to care enough to say, "I see all of that, but I see something else." And none of that matters because I can see something else. And just let God do what
Right.
God does. We aren't God. We can't do his job. None of us are that powerful. But if we allow him to use us, he'll do it. And it's just a matter of hearing them and loving them. Your sister says to love them where they are and let God take them where they need to be.
Now, I'd love it if you would share with the folks a little bit about, because you're also a writer, and I'd love to highlight that, right? I think that's another amazing part of who you are. You've always written and grabbed a book or a piece of paper or a napkin or whatever it is
Anything laying close to me, I'll start writing on. Right. It's not exactly unique. My mom would grab whatever. She would write, she would take a calendar and write across it if that's all that was available. She just always was writing. And my dad's mom, my grandmother on my dad's side, was the same way. And my grandmother on dad's side, our paper in Greenfield was just a, couple sheets, whatever, back in the day. It wasn't a big deal. But when they listed the people that had died or the people that were sick in the hospital, grandmother would go and visit those in the hospital. She didn't have to know them. She had a little basket. She was a little 4'11", 4'11", just a little bitty thing. And she had a basket she would put on her arm. She lived on a farm. And she would put this little basket on her arm, and she would have goodies in it for all the people she was going to visit.
Oh my goodness.
And grandmother would go to their homes and clean their homes and that kind of thing, so that when they got out of the hospital, their house was ready. When people lost individuals, grandmother bought cards, and she would write a card and put a little bit of change in it and send it to whoever had lost a spouse or a child or something. And so from grandmother, she loved Oral Roberts. And so she always listened to him. I don't care what she was doing when Oral Roberts prayed, you stopped everything. And she would lay her hand on the radio and pray with Oral Roberts. And when I would go to school, like I say, my senior year, I was there. And when I would come home from school, my sister and I would come in. It was nothing to come in and find grandmother on her knees praying. On her knees in front of the chair, pray. A lot of what I learned from her. And she always acknowledged everybody. If they were hurting, if they were in the hospital, if they had lost a loved one, she acknowledged everybody in Greenfield. My mom's dad was a Baptist minister. And my grandmother was a beautiful half Indian, beautiful lady, very kind, always smiling, always soft spoken, just the neatest. And the funny thing about that is my mom's side of the family were diehard Baptists. My dad's side of the family were diehard Methodists. And then I come along and I'm non-denominational. And so it was quite,
Right.
it's quite a mix. But my grandmother was an amazing lady in doing all the things that she did. And we would go to the farm, my brother and sister and I, we'd go there in the summer, and we could run as far as we could see. And the fences indicate that you're leaving your property going to someone else's. And like I said, we run as far as we could see, even on their property. We'd pick blackberries and elderberries and go to the strawberry patch and get strawberries. Grandmother's garden had every fresh vegetable or fruit you want. Cherry trees, apple trees. We'd stand under the apple tree and just pull those apples off and eat them and then pay the price. It was just amazing. She had watermelon, she had corn, she had green beans, whatever it was. We had everything we wanted. And my grandmother, my dad's mom, would send boxes home for Christmas and boxes full of fruit and nuts. She had a black walnut tree on the path as you walk up the hill toward the house. There was a black walnut tree there. And my brother and I would go and we'd get the walnuts, and she would have us sit on the porch with a hammer and crack them. And she would make all kind of goodies with them. And back in the day, they canned, veggies, and they made jelly, and they did their own thing. Grandmother made her own butter and stuff like that. I mean, they it was so different. That you haven't had good water till you have well water. Nothing tastes like it.
Mm. Well, and full circle, a lot of what you're describing is what people are trying to pay to experience now. There are a lot of people that pay a lot of money to
Right,
be able to have their own fresh whatever they eat,
right,
right there in their home, in their backyard,
right,
however you're doing it,
right,
whether it's a small farm or hydroponics or anything of the nature.
right.
A lot of people are trying to get back to that now,
Hmm.
so it's amazing that you were able to grow up like that.
Share your story on the Colors of Sound podcast. Our mission is to create a safe space for community members from around the world to share their unique stories. Do you have an interesting story to share? Or perhaps a journey of triumph from a challenge that you faced? Do you want the world to know about your talent? Visit our website and complete our guest intake form at WDON1204.com. The Colors of Sound podcast. Discover how much we have in common.
Every morning we get up to new mercy and new grace. And the grace of God is always sufficient, no matter what you're going through, whatever it is. It doesn't matter how bad or whatever. God's grace is always sufficient for it. Always.
Yeah,
There is enough grace there to carry you through. And so then we can afford to show grace to others, you know,
absolutely.
when
Absolutely.
when they get down to that last nerve you got, where you feel like that, that nerve is being stretched. And if you don't get away, it's going to break. Um, Even then, we can afford to show grace, just grace,
Yeah,
which,
that's right.
which lets everybody live and that kind of thing. Because people who don't know the word need the grace to be able to find the word. But people who know the word already know if they're walking where the Lord said or if they're not, and grace will help you to get there. Well,
I love it.
yeah.
I love it. I always tell people, it's so much easier to be positive and to give out positive energy and to be kind to people, to uplift people when you have an opportunity. That takes so much less energy than being
Oh,
hateful and negative. But you run into it all the time. This is
yeah.
the part, the media plays into that. It's always so sad to see all of the videos online that they videotape just people getting beat up or old
Hmm.
people getting punched or pushed over. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? Like some of these
Yeah.
things are just like really, really, really out of control, and people are on the outside of that boundary, like all the way.
Yeah. And I've been blessed in that regard. First by the military, by your dad being in the military, but the Christians that were around me, the family that was around me, I've really, really been blessed. I'm wanting to move from this house, but it's not for any reason other than it's too big and I need something smaller. I've never felt like anybody was going to bother me. I've always had good neighbors, you know. Well, almost always. I had one said I was kind of glad to see them go, but uh, all of my neighbors have been kind and let me know they don't care what time. I've had nurses as neighbors, and they say I don't care what time you call. I'm here for you. And so God has it's something about the favor of the Lord, walking in His favor.
Yeah, yeah,
It doesn't preclude hurt or changes or bad things happening. It's just that if I'm going to go through a bad thing, I'd rather go through it with the Lord than by myself.
right.
And it's a danger to tell people that when you get saved, everything's going to be peaches and cream, because it isn't. But
That's right.
but when it isn't, it's okay. It's still okay. I've enjoyed talking to you today, son.
Well, I've enjoyed talking to you too, Mom. I mean, I think we've given them a lot of good stuff to think about. I think definitely, my siblings, the nieces and nephews, the grandkids, great grandkids, everybody's going to really enjoy um, the history lesson, of learning about Aunt Matt and learning about Grandma and Grandpa on both sides. And you know, there's so many other amazing nuggets I think people are going to be able to pull out of this.
Mhm.
But more than anything, I think, I commend you for a life of service and, not just service to the community, but your actual Christian service. I mean, there's so many generations and generations that you have blessed externally, but it's the same within our own family.
Mhm.
So it's just very powerful. So I'm just very grateful for the way that we were brought up. And, a lot of folks have grown up in broken families, and to see you and dad there together, and just to be able to experience the two of you, you became surrogate parents for a lot of
And it
kids.
was fun. We did.
It's a wonderful legacy,
Yep.
on both sides. And so many of the family members on both sides are service minded.
Yeah.
So we're gonna wrap it up. I thank you so much for being here and for sharing this time. I'm so happy it's me and not my older sister Donna, so I get to
Yeah.
say, haha, I'm the one who did this with mom.
You should be
And
you should be shamed. It's been a wonderful, wonderful journey, and to see all of you all grow up and be who you are and do what you do. Um, I'm just proud, absolutely proud. And I know that the hand of the Lord is the biggest part of all that everybody does. Y'all couldn't do what you do if it wasn't for him.
WDON1204.com presents our new book, The Colors of Sound Podcast Planner and Journal. In order for a podcast to bring about transformational change, the content must be engaging, memorable, and have a level of quality that sets it apart from the crowd. We focus on the art of storytelling and the development of your point of view as a host. The Colors of Sound Podcast Planner and Journal. Visit Amazon.com and get your copy today.